Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air for September 4th in the 36th week of 2012. Aware is the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, made up of people who believe that if Americans knew what the U.S. government is doing in their name, they would be appalled. More than two-thirds of Americans already think that the U.S. should withdraw from its wars in the Middle East, but that seems to make no difference to our out-of-control government. Aware was begun more than 10 years ago when it became clear that the U.S. government, which had killed hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq during the Clinton administration, was now going to invade Afghanistan. This program was begun more than 4 years ago when the media owned by large U.S. corporations stopped reporting on the ongoing war in the Middle East. So now each week at this time we bring you news and comment about the wars that the United States government is conducting around the world, and about the opposition to them here and across the country by people like us who see that these wars betray our democratic principles. In a New York Times article at the end of May, President Obama celebrated his policy of worldwide murder by drone strikes and assassination teams. Of course, the most important thing the federal government does is kill people, and the Obama administration has shown itself even more brutal and efficient at that than the Bush administration was. But both administrations have followed a generation-long U.S. foreign policy to the benefit of only a tiny economic elite in America, and to the detriment of most Americans and others. Today, the U.S. is threatening, invading, and occupying countries from Libya to Pakistan, and from Central Asia to Central Africa, a vast circle with a more than 2,000-mile radius, sometimes called the Greater Middle East. The U.S. military calls it Central Command. This region has the world's greatest concentration of oil and natural gas, and our government is spending hundreds of billions of dollars month after month to control it. Control and not just access to these energy resources is what our government demands. We, in fact, import very little oil from the Mideast, no more than we export from the U.S. But control of Mideast oil gives the U.S. an unparalleled advantage over countries in Europe and Asia who are our economic competitors. In other words, President Obama is killing men, women, and children in Asia and Africa in our name because China and other countries need oil, and our government intends to control where they get it. Our government says that we're conducting these vastly expensive wars to stop terrorism and protect civilians. But we can see that instead we're killing civilians and creating terrorists. These wars are against the interests of the vast majority of Americans, as well as those of people around the world. They serve the interests only of what the Occupy Wall Street movement calls the 1%. This U.S. war policy remains essentially the same, whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in office. More than 2,000 Americans have died in Afghanistan alone in 10 years of war, and most of them since Obama became president. In addition, thousands of Afghans have been killed, and thousands of Afghans and Americans are living with horrible injuries. The corpses, including those of children, are piled high around the White House. The government claims that the war in Iraq is over, and that the war in Afghanistan is winding down, but neither is true. In traditional imperialist fashion, like Britain and France in the 19th century, the United States government is relying on puppet governments to do its bidding. Iraq, with the world's second largest oil reserve, will have the world's largest embassy, ours of course, and a collection of U.S. officials and mercenaries the size of an army division. Afghanistan, Pipelineistan as it's called, has agreed, under pressure, to host U.S. troops until at least 2024, although the president tried to cover that over this week. We'll mention that if we have time. The Obama administration's innovation in the U.S. war in the Mideast and Africa is to add assassinations by drone or death squad. The U.S. Special Operations Command is now amazingly active in 120 countries, according to the command's spokesman. President Obama has killed men, women, and children, including American citizens, with drone attacks on Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. Some new ones already this morning. Countries with which we are not at war, and some of which are supposed to be allies. He's acting with no legal authority and an obvious violation of the Constitution. Bush kidnapped people around the world and tortured them in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo in pursuit of U.S. foreign policy. Obama simply murders them. Our friend Kathy Kelly, from Voices of Creative Nonviolence in Chicago, wrote recently from the Mideast, "It's hard to fathom the vast indifference of Western observers to what their militaries are doing in Afghanistan, to the lives lost, the futures broken, the families and friendships and loves torn apart, all of which will occur in the next country we collectively agree to demolish, and the next. Our apathy surely makes it easier for military and political elites to wage multiple wars. They count on us to look out at a world that we've been told is barbaric and feral, addled unlike ours, with terrifying fundamentalism, driving them, unlike us, to incessant violence." I hope the irony is clear. You're watching Aware on the Air. Tonight we'll hear from the following members and friends of Aware. Ron Szoke on lower than whale feces. Yeah, I said it with a straight face, too. Karen Medina on upcoming political events. And some videos, if there's time, including one of my absolute favorite hip-hop songs. I'm Carl Estabrook. I'll be back with some remarks on Obama's murders for votes. And we'll start with Ron Szoke and his euphonious title.
Yes, well, it's my somewhat disillusioned comment on the level of recent political discussion and the political mendacity and fraudulence that surrounds us every day. And it is having its effect on my personal morale, and more importantly, I think, on the general level of civic morale, and even in this country, and military morale abroad. An index of that being the rising level of military suicides. This continuing puzzle in the minds of some, apparently, about why this is continuing. And I think the obvious answer is one that's unacceptable to a lot of people. It's the futility and fraudulence of the war that is being waged there across the Middle East in pursuit of what are called American interests. Meanwhile, as we are told by one of our presidential contenders that we must throw more and more and more billions at the Pentagon, there's the corresponding call for more austerity in the economies of Europe and in this country too, in order that we may deal with the debt and the deficit. What's driving the projected debt? This is from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. The major factor in the recent increases of the debt are the, according to this analysis, the Bush tax cuts of about a decade ago. So if you look at the graph, you'll see the tax cuts and wars account for nearly half of the public debt by 2019, according to this projection. President Bush's tax cuts, this says, and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq explain virtually the entire federal budget deficit over the next 10 years. So what about the public debt, which is basically the sum of the annual budget deficits minus annual surpluses over the nation's entire history? The chart below shows that the Bush-era tax cuts and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, including their associated interest costs, account for almost half of the projected public debt in 2019, measured as a share of the economy, if we continue current policies. Altogether, the economic downturn, the measures enacted to combat it, including the 2009 Recovery Act and the financial rescue legislation, play a smaller role in the projected debt increase over the next decade. So, again, rattling off figures tends to become mind-deadening and rather boring. But I'll simply point up again what has been claimed by some economists, that if we did nothing, if we went off the so-called fiscal cliff in January allowed the Bush tax cuts to expire, the supposed debt crisis would cure itself over a longer run of several years. So this is what a do-nothing policy would accomplish for us, and yet that answer is unacceptable, it seems, to a lot of people. A consequence of the austerity measures being imposed on Europe is this piece. Austerities cost abandoned children in Europe. As the Eurozone debt crisis deepens and austerity measures take their toll across Europe, the number of young children and babies abandoned across the region has increased, according to local charities. The rise in the abandonment of infants across Europe is most visible in the spread of baby hatches or boxes across Europe, where unwanted infants are left anonymously. The phenomenon was previously more prevalent among immigrants, but is becoming more widespread among financially desperate members of the local population. The hatches are sensor activated so that when a baby is placed, an alarm is activated and a carer comes to collect the child. Despite the practice being widely viewed as contravening the 1953 European Convention on Human Rights, of the 27 EU member countries, 11 countries still have baby hatches in operation, including Germany, Italy, and Portugal. In those countries where hatches are illegal, the number of infants abandoned in hospitals, clinics, and churches have risen, raising concerns among European charities, the UN, and the European Commission that austerity measures and increasing social deprivation are the catalyst for the rise in child abandonment. I believe we still have such a law here in Illinois. People who have a newborn that they feel that they cannot possibly take care of and raise properly can be deposited just a few dozen feet from here in the near the police station, and they will be looked after somehow. The problem with the law, some have found, is that there was no age limit placed on the children who were to be abandoned, and some people have been trying to deposit their teenagers in these places and leave them with the
I'm sorry,
police.
that's not funny at
And
all.
yeah, which is much more understandable. Anyway, this is just a taste of what Michael Clare calls the coming hunger wars, heat, drought, rising food costs, global unrest, the spreading poverty and deprivation that are going to be the inevitable consequence of the so-called austerity measures that are being implemented or advocated across Europe and in the USA. Meanwhile, another sign of the times concerning degenerate public discussion. Articles appearing in the Wall Street Journal, as you might guess, worrying about the moral character of the poor who are getting entitlements, the government handouts that they have not earned. What always amazes me is all this worry about the so-called moral character of the poor who are getting government handouts from the nanny state, and a lack of concern about the moral character of the rich.
Right.
And I'm just as concerned about their moral character as anyone else is. Those who are allowed to inherit millions upon millions of dollars and have never worked to earn the money and learn the value of a dollar in the way that we're told that the poor should. It's really amazing, this lack of concern. But any expressed concerns about the moral character of the rich will be greeted typically with total incomprehension. What are you talking about? That's not our concern. So it's another reflection of the lack of concern for the entitlements of corporate executives, for example. They insist they have contractual arrangements, which are the justification. These are sacrosanct. That's why they're getting their millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And yet, when there's a difficulty in a city, they can violate union contracts.
Right.
And then the contracts are no longer so holy, it appears. So it's a remarkable turnaround. I would urge that they be equally sacrosanct in both cases. This morning, interesting piece turned up about the climb down from the war rhetoric in Israel after the speech by the American general last week, saying that the USA doesn't want to be implicated in the supposed forthcoming attack on Iran. And this is a new note in the whole discussion. It sounds as if the USA is now wanting to keep Israel on the leash, and whether we can really do that, and it's viewed as a prudent thing to do before the election or whatever, is subject to a lot of speculation now. We will be told again and again that Israel can do only what the USA allows it to do. I'm not sure that's true, but what's often pointed to as the principal reason why we should attack Iran is the threat to Israel and then to the USA, supposedly. The rhetoric coming out of Iran saying that Israel must be destroyed and eliminated. This seems to be kind of ritual utterance on their part. I'm not sure how meaningful it is. Like Cicero declaiming Carthage must be destroyed.
Exactly.
It's a kind of ritual utterance, a litany designed, I think, to arouse and reassure political supporters. But what it actually amounts to, again, I think is very much subject to debate. So other notes, U.S. officials will not be prosecuted for their role in the tortures and renditions of a few years ago has been announced by our Attorney General. There seems to be some kind of gentleman's agreement among all of these people that they will not prosecute their predecessors in these offices, and hoping that that will continue, I guess, so that they will not be prosecuted themselves. The military people who burned the Korans and urinated on the bodies of dead Afghan insurgents will get only minor non-judicial punishment. They will have their wrists slapped, and that will be the end of it. Again and again, when there are these murders of Afghan civilians and other people in the Middle East, it turns out in the end that the charges are dropped, in remarkable contrast to what's happening to Bradley Manning. So another sign, another straw. An Israeli court has declared Israel entirely innocent of the killing of Rachel Corrie.
Yes.
In this suit brought by her parents. So apparently they think that will be the end of that. And another bit of offensive matter at the bottom of the ocean, I'm afraid, that annoys me, but not a lot of other people. And there I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Ron. lot of important things there. I think you're doing Cicero a disservice. I think it was Cato the Elder.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yes. The only reason that happens to be on my mind is my daughter has just finished reading the series of Robert Harris's novels about Cicero and the politics of first century B.C. Rome. They're marvelous. Robert Harris is perhaps the leading political novelist, I think, in the world today, and has written about a thinly disguised Tony Blair, whose advisor he was at one time, and it's not a complimentary portrait, and also an amazing alternate history novel in which Germany wins the Second World War, and the novel is set in the 1960s, and it caused a scandal when it came out because it suggested that a world in which Germany won the Second World War will look very much like what the world did look like today.
Wow.
So yeah, and,
Right.
and one can only read the news about the austerity programs and Mrs. Merkel's diktats across Europe and believe that indeed something of that sort is true. You're watching Aware on the Air. Karen, with comments on Ron's observations?
I just wanted to talk about Rachel Corrie's, the trial.
Yeah.
They were saying that she was responsible for her own death, that she should have gotten out of the way, and that, but what she was doing was she was protecting people's houses and homes.
Right.
And if someone, say, like, was protecting the redwoods in, the western part of the United States and stood in front of them or chained themselves to them, there's no way that that they would have used one of the tractors to run over a person. And so the whole concept that he was justified in running her over is just, I can't even imagine it. And also in that trial, they were also saying that the Israelis had never contacted certain people who were supposed to be contacted about, who were witnesses or who were supposed to be testifying in this, that they never even followed up on all the things, the parts that they were supposed to be following up on. And so there's a whole lot of controversy over that. And
the American ambassador to Israel, who comes from around here, Dan Shapiro, got into some trouble about this by being quoted as saying that the Israeli investigation was a whitewash. He didn't use that word, but that was the implication of what he said.
It was.
And there's been a lot of backtracking about whether or not he did say that or something, but the scandal is big enough, whether or not American officials recognize it.
Right.
And it is a shocking thing, and I think the world is quite shocked about it. It's a travesty of justice, obviously, and once again, it fits in with the other ones that Ron mentioned in regard to the American Army these last in recent weeks.
And Desmond Tutu coming out and saying that Tony Blair and George W. Bush should be tried for in the international criminal courts for for following the intelligence or the fake intelligence. I think that's a earth-shaking situation.
It's
so.
caused quite a stir in Britain. Less of a stir here, but
Yes.
the British papers the British press has been quite concerned about it because of the moral standing that Desmond Tutu has and the terminal sleaziness of Tony Blair.
Right.
And, so it's,
Right.
But it also reminds us that there's a lot of unfinished business, particularly in a week in which the U.S. Exculpated the last two the CIA from the last two torture deaths, for any sort of blame for the last two torture deaths after essentially wiping the slate clean for all the other torture of the previous administration. And the fact that the torture is continuing, by all accounts, in Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan particularly, and in Guantanamo apparently, is one of the major motives for this administration not to prosecute anything done in a previous administration. There's actually a pretty good column in the local Fish Wrap about that this week. This morning, Nat Hintoff, who has a column entitled "Obama Continuing Bush's Violations of Human Rights," and part of that violation, of course, is to indemnify the people who committed the torture in the Bush regime, perhaps because it's still going on in the Obama regime.
Right. And as you point out in the opening segments, the way Obama deals with a lot of people that they don't want to deal with is they just send a drone after them and kill them so that we don't have to deal with whether they're tortured or not because they're actually dead.
The amazing thing is that is not just a crashing existential irony, as it were, but an actual plan on the part of the Obama administration. We learned that from the famous puff piece about Obama's kill list in the New York Times that appeared at the end of May. Now, this is quite remarkable for the Obama administration to say, okay, we avoid the problems of the incarceration of terrorists, in inverted commas, in Guantanamo and elsewhere by killing them first. Same thing we did to Anwar al-Awlaki, the American citizen who was too embarrassing a spokesperson for the opposition to American invasion of the Middle East. It's remarkable how crass, if a stronger word isn't available, the administration is being on this, and the appalling account that we got from the New York Times, which was meant to be a defense of Obama's wonderful works in national security, meant particularly to defend him against any accusations that he hadn't been, quote, strong enough, close quote, in national security. Look at all the people I've killed, he said. And it's an astonishing approach, which if we were reading about it in another country, if this were President Assad, for example, in Syria, we would be rightly appalled. But since it's that nice Mr. Obama who has a peace prize, well, somehow it goes down the memory hole.
Right.
You're watching Aware on the Air, and I think the theme that you raised first, Ron, the question of military morale and what's going on in the American military right now, is one we perhaps should be thinking about more than we have been. It's clearly been suppressed in the American news recently. It threatens to obtrude just a bit in the political campaign, so it's worthwhile, I think, remembering something else that's gone down the memory hole, and that is that in the Vietnam War, it was finally the mutiny, essentially, the revolt of the American troops in Vietnam that ended American participation in that war. That's not in the history books, but that's in fact what happened. The Nixon administration withdrew the army of draftees from Vietnam and ended the draft precipitately in 1973 because of the fact that too many American soldiers were fragging their officers in order to prevent them from leading them into the jungle. Too many American soldiers in Vietnam were refusing to fight, that the Army was breaking down, the Army had become unreliable, and the Pentagon felt that the only way to fix that was to withdraw the Army of conscripts and establish an army of mercenaries, what we call a volunteer army in this country. That's what we have now. Well, what we see now, and once again, I don't want to stress the parallel between Vietnam and Afghanistan because although there are parallels, they're not really all that strong. But it seems to me that it is instructive to think about what's happening to the military, the very different military that the U.S. has sent to Afghanistan, and its breakdown is shown particularly in the things that Ron noted. The vast rise in suicides in the military, the shocking examples of homicide of American soldiers killing indiscriminately people in the area that they are supposedly protecting, and of course what's also been called fratricide, that is the current phrase is green on blue killings, that is, attacks on American soldiers by our ostensible allies, the Afghan military, that has produced a remarkable number of deaths recently. This is a military in substantial disarray, and once again, they're not stupid in Washington, they're thinking about it. The reason the drone war has expanded so much is precisely so that the emphasis on troops on the ground can be minimized. This is the way we're going to kill people in Afghanistan in order to make our writ run, not with ill-paid troops on the ground.
Interesting development there. There have been so many instances of the green on blue violence, as it's called. When we undertake to train Afghans for the police and the military, there have been too many instances, apparently, of the first time they're issued a gun, an assault rifle, they pick it up and start shooting Americans or NATO troops, and so on. So there's a new policy, at least in some places in Afghanistan. There's a suspension of 30 days starting to train new Afghans for the police or the military, and they will try to implement new vetting procedures to figure out, perhaps try to predict which ones are going to take up arms against NATO and the American troops. So good luck there, but that's what they're going to try to do, apparently.
Yeah, the actual steps that have been taken here are remarkably revelatory. American soldiers are now required to have loaded handguns whenever they're in an Afghan base, which was prevented before. I think these were our allies, you know, but now there's a problem. Even more interesting, perhaps, is the General Allen's order establishing guardian angels. That's his term. The guardian angels are American soldiers who are to be armed and awake and watching whenever Americans are sleeping, so that any assault on them by our ostensible allies can be countered.
Wow.
So it's an official guardian angel program because our Afghan allies are unreliable. This is quite remarkable. It gets worse. There was an article in the British paper The Guardian this week, not in any American paper, and in fact I think I don't know of any American outlet that picked this up. But it's not a casual article. It's part of a new book about to be published by Verso in London about the recruitment of neo-Nazis into the American military.
Yes.
What the article demonstrates at length is the fact that the difficulty, even in a time of a recession, of refilling the ranks of the American military has led to an increasing relaxation of the limitations for signing up into the American Army, both in physically, that is, obesity formerly prevented one from becoming a member of the armed forces, doesn't anymore. Education, you had to have a high school degree or its equivalent to join the American military until recently. Now you don't. And previous condition of servitude, we might say, that is whether you'd been in jail or how long you'd been in jail and how many crimes you were convicted of. Those requirements, too, have been lessened. And one of the things this has done is produced a military with a large number of neo-Nazi gang members who have, in some cases, consciously called on their members to join the military for the weapons training they get for it, to be ready to fight the battle against people of color and the Zionist occupation government and whoever else the neo-Nazis are now thinking of as their primary enemies.
That's something else the Pentagon does not want to talk about and is inclined to deny whenever it's brought up. But yes, there's this movement within the military to all these people who are being recruited to ultra-right-wing organizations, skinheads, neo-Nazis, and the rest. And it's becoming a more and more troublesome element.
And I'm just going to comment again on mercenary type stuff. So we can control to some degree who goes into the military. And we're already concerned about that. But we have no control over who joins the companies, like Z and Blackwater.
Oh, the mercenary
Yeah, the
groups,
mercenary.
right,
Yeah.
yes, mhm.
So we have no control whatsoever, and we have no idea how they're recruiting their people.
And
Well, I would qualify that. I mean, it would be possible to write into the contract that certain people will not be accepted, but whether that will be effective, I have no idea.
But that brings up another thing that we're also not talking about in regard to this war, and that is the large number of mercenaries.
Yes.
We usually call them in the Bush administration phrase contractors, but the large number of mercenaries who are serving not only in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan. And but as you say, the requirements here are not even so strict as the not very strict requirements for joining the American military. Justin Kennard wrote the article that's in The Guardian this week, and it's worth looking at if you want to be scared. It's not happy reading, but it is an aspect of this war that, as Ron says, the Pentagon does not want you to hear much about. You're watching Aware on the Air. We are about to turn, I think, to events going on in Champaign-Urbana in reaction to this war and the social malformations that are bound up with it. We have a number of upcoming events.
We do.
Right, Karen?
And I just want to point out how important the people of Champaign-Urbana are. I mentioned earlier Desmond Tutu's announcement that he thinks that Blair and Bush should be tried in the international criminal courts. That whole movement was actually started here in Champaign-Urbana by a professor here at the law school. So Champaign-Urbana and its residents are vitally important in the war against the wars, I guess. Okay. Some events that are happening around Champaign-Urbana this week are Wednesday, September 5th. There's a teleconference on restorative justice with Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander is the woman who wrote The New Jim Crow, which is being read by several groups around town. Anyway, the Peace Alliance is organizing a series of discussions on restorative justice. The first of them will be this Wednesday morning, and it will involve Michelle Alexander. Others are scheduled later this week and next, with speakers including Mikhail Lubansky of Urbana-Champaign, and he will be on September 13th, and Carl Stauffer of Eastern Mennonite University on the 19th. You can sign up for the Wednesday morning events with Michelle Alexander, and the website, I'll just give you the general website. It's http://dopeace.us/events/restorative justice telecouncil series. And that should be a really interesting series to participate in. And again, they are sponsored by the Peace Alliance. Thursday, September 6th at 5 p.m. is the Urbana Veterans, at the Urbana Veterans Memorial. There will be a demonstration in support of Bradley Manning. He's the accused whistleblower that is accused of giving a lot of documents to WikiLeaks. And this is part of the demonstration is part of a nationally coordinated demonstration. And I guess one of the sponsors is Alliance for Global Justice or warisacrime.net are both involved in this. And the reason that they chose September 6th for this is it's the eve of Obama's acceptance speech. We want to criticize Obama's administration for the way that Bradley Manning is being treated and how he is a whistleblower rather than a criminal. And so he should be protected and not criminalized. And so there's been a huge discussion on Peace Discuss and other places this week on whether we should be criticizing Obama at this point. And I say we should criticize anybody who does anything wrong. Sunday, September 9th at 3 p.m., there will be an event called An Al-Nakba Survivor's Story, A Hope for Peace. This will be a presentation and discussion by a Palestinian grandmother, Mrs. Fatima Sawail, who experienced Al-Nakba, the catastrophe, in 1948. come and hear her personal survival story, as well as a discussion by her daughter and granddaughter, Nita and Lena, sponsored by the Urbana-Champaign Peace Initiative. And again, that is Sunday, September 9th at 3 p.m. at the Champaign Public Library. There will be a lecture called Can Technology Serve Social Justice? And this is a lecture by Virginia Eubanks from SUNY in Albany, New York. And this will be Wednesday, September 12th at 5:30 p.m. at the Champaign Public Library. And in this talk, Dr. Eubanks will reflect on 15 years of efforts with 3 grassroots organizations: Our Knowledge, Our Power, Surviving Warfare, the Popular Technology Workshops, and the women at the YWCA Making Social Movement, to make technology serve the needs of oppressed and exploited people in the United States. And so that, again, will be September 12th at 5:30 p.m. at the Champaign Public Library. Then there will be a lecture by Henry Louis Gates from Harvard University entitled Blacks in Latin America, and that will be Tuesday, September 18th at 7 p.m. in room 114 at David Kinley Hall on the U of I campus.
They're going to serve Obama's beer there.
Yeah, really.
Gates, you know, was the guy that ran afoul of the cop in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right.
And
Right.
ended up having a beer in the White House. And this week we hear about Obama's beer, so maybe.
Maybe
maybe
the
not.
two are related.
Yeah.
Yes. Gates was trying to get into his own house and was arrested. The police, yeah.
And
Yeah.
didn't handle it very well either.
Right. And then the last event that I've got on my list so far is there will be a public forum on alternatives to incarceration. And this is vitally important to Champaign-Urbana as the county board is considering the situation with the jails here. And so this public forum will be really, really important, and you should come to it. This will be Friday, September 21st at 6 p.m., and I believe it's here in the, it doesn't say where it is. I'm almost positive that it's here in the.
Right here, even where we sit.
Yes, in the, is it here? Yes, it is. Jason says it's here at Public Television in Urbana. So this is the place. And so the City Council chambers for Urbana. And this is part of the campaign against the plan to spend $20 million on new jail cells. There are alternatives. There are better ways to spend tax money. And the people on the panel will include Reverend Zerniel Bogan of Black Chamber of Commerce. The second person will be Diana Zell of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, because a lot of the people that end up in jail here in Champaign County or anywhere are mentally ill. And that's how they end up there. The third person on the list will be Diane Lennick of the ACLU, and evidently she's a rep from the Immigration Forum, and she's also a representative from the Immigration Forum. And then James Kilgore of Citizens with Convictions will also be on the panel. And again, this is sponsored by the Sioux Citizens for Peace and Justice, which I guess I hadn't noted. And so all those events, I think, are well worth going to, and I expect to see you all there.
I must say, I think Citizens with Convictions is the best named civic group I've heard of in a long time.
Isn't that awesome?
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
And you know who this group is, right?
Yes, oh yes.
Yes,
Why,
yeah.
you should explain.
Well, right. Citizens with Convictions is they're working for the rights of people who have served their time in jail or prison, actually, and are now out, but they still have troubles getting by because of the laws that are in place about where they can work, where they can live, where they can't live, where they can't work.
What jobs they can, yes, exactly.
And in some states they can't vote. In the state of Illinois, they can vote, but they are not told that they can vote. You know, certain things like that. And so this is working for, even on applications, there's a little box that you have to say that you've never
convicted of a felon.
Right, you've never been convicted of a felon, and that automatically, puts you in the discard pile rather than going through at least part of the process and getting you, if you are a good candidate, you're a good candidate for the job, and so they should ask you maybe at some point, but not at the beginning application point, and so that is some of these things are worse in other states, but the state of Illinois is not very good. especially with on where they can live, and how much the money that we charge, like the little tiny fees that they have to pay, add up so quickly. It can, and just that could put you back into jail just because you can't pay the fees on. And they wanted to add a fee for keeping the police training institute open, and so they were going to charge all people who even got arrested a fee for keeping that open. And this is crazy. I mean, taxpayers should be paying for this. If we want to keep the Police Training Institute open, then we should all be paying for it. Not we should not be adding tiny fees onto people in order to keep them in jail or to keep them in poverty. And I'm sorry. So Citizens with Convictions is a group that is they all have convictions, and they're working for the rights of people who have been convicted and are now out. And it's a great group, and if you want to join them, you should definitely look them up. So.
Thank you, Karen. You are watching Aware on the Air. It is one of our tasks to try to bring you news about America's wars that you don't hear elsewhere. And since there's been an agreement, as it were, between the administration and the media for some time now that little or nothing is to be said about the wars that the U.S. is carrying on abroad. Not much of the news hole, as they say in the media, is to be taken up with this. So there are people who actually count this and figure how much time goes into things like this. Our job then is to bring you stories that you don't hear. Here's some that you didn't hear from this week. Mr. Obama is killing for votes and having trouble getting his story straight. After months of vague comments about 2014 being a transition date in Afghanistan and the beginning of the end of the war there, President Obama went majorly off script in a campaign speech last Sunday, vowing that he would have all troops out of Afghanistan by 2014. While that may have been what they hoped voters would infer from past comments, it of course wasn't true. And Obama himself, of all people, should know that very well, since he was in Afghanistan himself earlier this year to sign the deal to keep U.S. troops there through 2024. Now they're on damage control. The story is getting in the way of the reality, and conversely. Press Secretary Jay Carney loudly disavowed the president's comments, insisting that Obama never said that he didn't mean it, that everyone knows what the policy is, and finally that the press is trying to play a game of gotcha for even reporting what Obama said on Sunday. Over the weekend, Obama had blasted repeatedly Governor Romney for not making his policy for resolving the Afghan conflict clear. The Obama people thought it was worthwhile for them to bring up the war, which in fact had not been mentioned in Romney's acceptance speech for the nomination. While the Republican candidate is conspicuously silent on the matter, the Obama administration's policy isn't much clearer, with the only thing we can apparently say for certain being that his policy is not what he told an audience in Boulder, Colorado this week that it was. Now, this is, it seems to me, distressing on several levels. One is that the Obama administration manages to make an error like this, manages not to get its story straight. Now, certainly the history of Barack Obama in talking about the war has been as a friend of mine says, using a basketball metaphor, to fake left and drive right. That is, he was elected president by a lot of people who thought that he would bring the war to an end, and was immediately given the Nobel Peace Prize that has only been given in the past to people who had actually accomplished bringing wars to an end, like, for example, Henry Kissinger. So the ironies were replete from the beginning, but Obama's ability to indicate that his policy is one thing while he does another in regard to the war, has been there from early on. That seems to be what they're trying to do with Afghanistan right now. This is the report of this event in Colorado last week, and we remember that it's no accident it was in Colorado, because Colorado is one of the so-called swing states, one of the states that the Democrats will have to have in order to be elected, and where the polls show a toss-up between Obama and Romney right now. This is from the account by Politico. President Obama did not rule out a future U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan when he told a campaign rally in Colorado Sunday that all U.S. forces would be out by the end of 2014, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney told reporters. And that's just as contradictory. I mean, the lead of the Politico article is meant to be contradictory. Quote, "We are bringing our troops home from Afghanistan. I've set a timetable. We will have them all out of there by 2014, close quote, Obama told a crowd in Boulder Sunday afternoon as he slammed GOP presidential candidate Mitt Romney for dodging the issue during his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention. However, about 2 hours after Obama spoke, Carney said in Obama's press secretary, said in a press briefing aboard Air Force One, the president had not pledged a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. Quote, "He never said that all the troops would be out," close quote, the press secretary declared. "What we've said, as we did in Iraq, and I think this is a good way to look at it, is in Iraq there were steps of sort of milestones where troops began to come home. More and more authorities transferred over to Iraqi security forces. The U.S. forces that remained as that process took place moved out of the cities and onto bases. And then the full transfer took place and combat mission ended, after which remaining U.S. forces eventually came home and the last U.S. soldier left, with the exception, obviously, of those who are at the embassy. There are 15,000 of those at the embassy in Iraq." I mean, once again, this is the Obama administration trying to spin this in both Iraq and Afghanistan. We're out of Iraq and the war is winding down. They're both lies. Neither is true. And here they're caught in the lie this last weekend, and there seems to be little they can do about it except reassert the lie.
Well, this requires some careful analysis. It's never clear what they're talking about, whether they're talking about combat troops,
Yeah.
which is one thing, uniformed personnel, which is a different group,
Mercenaries.
and then contractors or mercenaries, which is still a third group, and they're playing rock, paper, scissors with
Yeah.
this or something.
And also the number of ships that are offshore in those places as well.
Yeah.
And because they're not technically in the country, and then also the ones flying over. Yeah, it's a bunch of numbers that they, play around with. Sorry.
With this sorry example of the lies that the government has, not just this administration, but also this administration, has made a matter of course in the discussion of the war in the Middle East. I'd like to end today's program with a positive note, believe it or not. The positive note comes from our friend Kathy Kelly. I mentioned at the beginning of the program. Kathy Kelly is head of the group called Voices of Creative Nonviolence in Chicago, and has been our guest on this program before. Her group is extremely active in promoting the bases for peace in the Middle East, in Afghanistan particularly. The group formed originally by people who were violating the American ban on aid to Iraq under the sanctions. And Kelly has been working with this group since those days, and they now have some new initiatives, one of which is discussed on the excellent website War is a Crime. David Swanson, also a friend of this ground, has put together a website under that title, which I recommend to you highly. But there is an article there this week from Kathy Kelly and her friends entitled 2 Million Friends, A New Approach in Afghanistan. 4 decades of war, 2 million people dead, trillions of dollars spent, money disappearing into the pockets of corrupt politicians, bureaucrats, policemen, and the armed forces. No accountability, no transparency, no infrastructure. The misery and poverty of the majority of the people continues unabated decade after decade. Children freeze to death in the winter. They starve to death all year round. The question remains, who benefits from this misery? The human cost of war doesn't enter into any politician's calculations. In October 2011, Secretary of State Clinton emphasized a new three-track strategy, fight, talk, build, claiming, quote, to pursue all three tracks at once as they are mutually reinforcing, close quote. 1 year later, it's clear that the third Afghan strategy of the Obama administration can be added to the scrap heap of failed strategies, along with the AFPAC strategy and the surge. No one is talking, nothing is being built, fighting is the only track that continues unabated, security, even in Kabul, is tenuous, peace seems a distant and illusory concept. On Sunday, September 2nd, the Afghan peace volunteers held a press conference in Kabul, Afghanistan, to introduce a new strategy called the 2 Million Friends Initiative. Built on a foundation of hope and goodwill, this initiative calls on ordinary citizens of all countries to join with ordinary Afghan citizens who are tired of corruption, hatred, and war to be friends. When asked about the role of international people, Raz Mohammed, a young man from Medan Wardak, replied, quote, the international people are just like us, ordinary people who want to work with us for peace, close quote. The wish is for 2 million friends in remembrance of each of the 2 million Afghan victims of 40 years of war in Afghanistan to join together in an appeal for peace. 2 million friends to tell our respective governments, enough, we wish to live without war. And you actually can sign up to this petition and get information about the ongoing campaign to establish this 2 million friends at the website that I mentioned, warisacrime.org, all one word, where you can read about the activities of this group. And it seems to me like one of the few hopeful things that's going on.
I agree.
You've been watching Aware on the Air for Tuesday, September 4th. It's Terror Tuesday, as they call it in Washington, when President Obama adds names to his kill list for summary execution. You can read about that in the famous New York Times article on the 29th of May. More than a dozen people, by the way, that we know of died that way today in countries with which we are not at war. Drone strikes in Yemen and Pakistan killed at least a dozen, and by some accounts a good number more people with love from the Obama administration this morning. You've been watching Aware on the Air for the 36th week of 2012, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. We'll have a special demonstration this Thursday, September 6th, from 5 to 6 p.m. in downtown Urbana near the courthouse in support of Bradley Manning and against the Obama administration's suppression of those who reveal the crimes our government is committing, the so-called whistleblowers. Remember, Terror Tuesdays are secret, except when the president wants to boast about them to the New York Times to improve his election chances. And government lawyers have recently refused to tell a federal judge whether they're following the judge's instructions not to imprison whistleblowers who have revealed such things. So if we're not here next week, by the way, you might...
We've been added to the list.
That demonstration I mentioned is 5 to 6 p.m. this Thursday at Broadway and Main in Urbana. The administration's murder and secrecy about it must be stopped. Our programs are available on YouTube and on Facebook. You can look for Aware, thanks to Jason Liggett of UPTV. And now this is Carl Estabrook for Ron Szoke, Karen Medina, Don McClure. Happy birthday, Don, right?
Yeah.
Stuart Levy, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.